So this is Josh Jacobs talking, and I'm a student attending the paramedic program at the College of Emergency Services. And since we are on the abdominal trauma chapter, I figured I should share my story of my abdominal trauma because it's pretty crazy, actually, I think. Um, so for those of you that don't know, 22 months ago, I was the passenger in a car crash, and I was literally impaled by a 2.25 inch steel fence pole. So the pole came through the front windshield. It went through my abdomen, clean through out my back, uh, through the car seat, and it lodged itself into the trunk of the Subaru Outback. And when this crash occurred, I was asleep initially. I was sleeping in the passenger seat. I was impaled into awakeness like I was Dracula or something. And the car crashed into the fence at 50 miles an hour. So I was suspended by the pole like a human shish kebab or something. And let me tell you something, that was the scariest moment of my life. Like, my intestines were hanging out of my body, and I was in indescribable pain. And in that moment, I knew I was going to die. Back in college, I was a teaching assistant in the cadaver lab at the University of Oregon. So I know my anatomy pretty well. And I was just picturing that pole and like all the things that could have ruined how much vasculature is in the abdomen. And I'm not near a hospital. I'm 5 hours from home on a mountaineering trip. And the fact that I'm able to share this story with you here today is pretty remarkable. So let's go ahead and get into it. To start, I'm going to go over the circumstances that led to the accident, kind of set the scene. Then I'll talk about what the experience was like for me from a patient's perspective. And lastly, I reached out to one of the first responders who saved me, Whitney. She was first on the scene, and she was with me through the whole ordeal, and she even visited me in the hospital afterwards. She is amazing, totally my hero, and she gave her full account of what she could recall from that call. So we'll go ahead and get started. This first image is a mountain called Dragontail Peak. It's this breathtaking mountain out in Leavenworth, Washington. So it's near Wenatchee. It overlooks Kolchak Lake, and it's in this region called the Enchantments, which is just a beautiful area with all these high elevation alpine lakes and really cool mountains. So in this next photo, you're going to see a little bit of Kolchak Lake, which is where we had lunch and shared it with all of these Canadian jays. They're also called whiskey jacks. They will literally eat out of your hand, as you'll see in this next photo. So after lunch, we go and start trying to climb Dragontail Peak. And Ashley, the girl I'm climbing with this day, is not as strong of a climber as she thought she was. And it ended up taking a tremendous amount of time to get decently high up the mountain, and it took too long. So the sun was coming down. I didn't want to bivouac on the side of the mountain, so I said, we are going back. That was an even slower process because there was a lot of icy scrambling, and she was not very good at that. So many hours, many hours. We didn't get back to the car until about 8 a.m. When we got there, our car was the only one in the lot. She had left the lights on, so the battery was dead. So the next couple of hours, now this is November, it's freezing. The next couple of hours are spent on the side of the road, trying to flag anyone down. Finally, about 11 a.m. or so, we track someone down, we get them to jump up. By this time, we are freezing cold. We are so tired. I mean, it was a 5-hour drive in and then about 24 hours of pretty strenuous mountaineering and then a few hours with dead car batteries. I knew we were in no shape to try and drive home or anything like that. But Ashley thought that she could make it to this pizza restaurant because it was really close and we were starving. So I was like, all right, windows down, we go to the pizza place. So we had some pizza in the car. It was delicious. And I was like, listen, we cannot drive. Like, I'm zoning in and out. We've got to sleep right now. So she says, all right. I recline my chair. I immediately pass out. And then apparently she didn't feel comfortable just kind of sleeping in this pizza restaurant's parking lot. And she thought she was okay to drive somewhere else. So she took us driving. I'm asleep. I don't know. About a few minutes later, she's going down the highway at 50 miles an hour and she falls asleep. The road curves and we kept going straight and the car went barreling into a chain link fence that was the barrier for a petting zoo in Wenatchee. So I go from I've just had some pizza, I'm asleep, I think I'm sleeping in the parking lot, to wham, I'm impaled, I'm dying. I looked to my right and there was a crowd of people that were at the petting zoo and about half of them were crying. So that was, this whole thing was so surreal. Like, it was not real, no freaking way this is happening to me. But the pain tells me it's definitely happening to me. I remember one of the first things I did, because the pull was going through my core, I was like, do my legs still work? So I remember wiggling the toes on my left foot and they wiggled. And then I tried to wiggle the toes on my right foot and they wiggled. And I was like, okay, now I just have to make sure that this pull isn't all the way through me. So I asked, is it through me? She didn't want to tell me, but then I finally got her to say, yes, it's through you, and it's through the chair, and it keeps going to the back. And then I discovered that my intestines were hanging out, and I was like, well, it was horrible. But not too long after, I heard the ambulance, and I heard the firefighters, and let me tell you something. I was a bad patient. So I had just finished EMT school. I'm screaming at them, I have an evisceration. I need wet, sterile gauze covering this up. And I would scream, give me some fucking oxygen. I can't breathe. What are you doing? Give me some fucking oxygen now. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, they're so bad. I'm just cussing and apologizing, and they did such a good job dealing with that and not letting it razzle them because I was a mess. And then the next thing I very clearly remember is, so they got the jaws of life out and they had to cut the pole to get me out of there. But we had hit the fence at 50 miles an hour and the fence was still up. So it was under a tremendous amount of pressure. So they just told me, like, hold the pole still, try not to let it move. And when they cut that thing loose and it finally got released from the pressure, it was like, and oh my God, I thought that was it. I'm done now. I remember, so there were 4 cuts that they had to do with the jaws of life. Now, the first one was horrific because the pole jerked like 6 inches when that pressure from the car hitting the fence was finally released when they cut it. And then there were 3 more, which weren't as bad as the first one, but they were pretty awful because it moves. Everything moves, and that caused excruciating pain. Then they pulled me out and got me on a backboard on my side, on my uninjured side. And they got me in the ambulance ready for transport. Now, So it took them 10 minutes to get to me, which where I was pretty impressive to me. Uh, it took 40 minutes to get me extricated. And that was with like 8 people, maybe 10 people on scene. Everyone was working hard, knew that it was an emergent situation. And it just kind of shows how challenging that component of it can be. And that's all I'm going to share about my experience as a patient. Now I'm going to talk about what it was like from the first responder perspective. So I'm just going to read verbatim the email that I got from Whitney. So she says, "When we arrived, I was the first EMS provider down to you. I told you I needed to look and see if the pole was in your abdomen, and you said that it was. I lifted your shirt and found exposed bowel with no active bleeding. I knew it was at least partially impaled and then swept behind your back between you and the seat to see if I'd hit the pole. I did. Then I checked to see if it was through the seat you were sitting in and found that it was, and that it was also buried in the back seat as well. At this point, I told you to hang tight, and I ran for trauma pads and sterile water. I came back and applied a wet sterile dressing to your exposed bowel. At the same time, I was also attempting to coax the driver out of the vehicle. She was adamant about staying inside because she said she was holding you up. I was fully supporting you, and I really needed her out because as long as she was in the way, the fire department couldn't help with the extrication. So she ended up telling one of the firefighters to pull her out of the car if she has to because she wouldn't go. When she was out of the way, the first cut on the pole was made outside the windshield to relieve some of the tension. The pole was under quite a bit of tension, and when the first cut was made, the end still attached to the fence flipped up. The second cut that was made was behind your seat. The third cut was in front of you by about 12 inches. And she said she can't remember if there was a fourth cut or not. There was. They like pushed me forward and cut the pole behind me so that it wasn't through the chair. She says, from what I can remember, the process took about 45 minutes from the time we arrived until we were able to pull you out on the stretcher. During the 45-minute wait, I had you covered with a blanket and was under the blanket with you. In that time, I started an IV in your right AC and held the moist dressing on your abdomen. You were aware of what was happening and oriented times 4, but were also not making a ton of sense. You kept asking me to give you epi, which I explained would not help you. I'm sure I was doing that because I was very hypotensive and I felt like I was circling the drain or something. So she says, after a couple of requests for that, you told me you were going to die. And then I asked her a couple of times if I was going to die. She says, to be honest, I really thought you had to have some significant internal bleeding, and I was pretty surprised that you were as alert as you were. I told you that you were going to be fine, but I really wasn't sure. You were pale, cold, diaphoretic, and it was really cold outside. Once we got you to the ambulance, we started another IV and rapidly transported you to Central Washington Hospital, which was about a 30-minute drive. Your vitals were too low to give you any medications for pain, as stated in your report. When we moved you to the ER room, the surgeon was pushing and pulling gently on the pole and assessing your injuries. You were not yet intubated and had no pain management, so I asked him to stop. In addition to your pain not being managed, there was some tissue stuck to the pole that was coming from inside of you that moved with the pole each time you moved it. I told him what was happening and he stopped. I stayed with you while you were intubated and then left. I got an update a few days later that the pole had hit you with such force that it didn't tear you so much as it split you. And because the pole had an end cap on it, and due to the elasticity of your skin, the pole pushed your organs out of the way rather than puncturing them. My partners and I all thought that when they pulled the pole out, there would be some chunk of vital organ in it, but you were so lucky that it missed your organs and your spine. The surgeon reported that you had a mesenteric tear, some seriously bruised but intact intestines, and damage to your abdominal and back muscles, especially the back muscles, which sort of separated when the thicker back skin tinted before the pole finally went all the way. All right, so now I'm going to go through some photos from the event. So this first one is the pole going through the windshield. That's the pole that went through me there. Next one, so this thick beam here, that held a sign for the petting zoo, and I'm sure grateful that that was there, because you can see that it stopped the car, or else I don't know how much of the pole behind it would have went through me. The next one is just a picture on scene. The following one, so that's showing them entering into the car with the jaws of life. This next scene here, so they are packaging me on my side using pillows to get me in a position of comfort as best they can. This next photo is from my actual chart from this scenario. I tracked it down because I had a lot of questions. I wanted to know exactly how these guys did save my life, because it seemed so impossible. And I was asked by some firefighters, like, did they give you something so that you would forget what happened? Did they give you something for pain? And I honestly couldn't definitively tell. I couldn't remember well enough. Some notable vitals from this chart. So we had a rapid pulse all the way through this. Respiratory rate was pretty rapid at 20. Came down to 16, but still pretty rapid the whole way. The blood pressure, so at one point it went from 150 over 82, and then 10 minutes later down to 80 over 60, and then 7 minutes after that, 82 over palp. So that was why I didn't get any medications for pain management. The right decision, but not doing too well. Each EKG was showing sinus tachycardia, and then my skin was cold, pale, and diaphoretic. All right, then we have the second page of my report. So some notable things: Glasgow Coma Scale 15, clear airway, clear lungs. So there was a 2 to 2.5 inch metal pole impaled in the upper left quadrant, 4 to 6 inches of bowel exposed on the anterior abdomen. Interventions made, so they used an 18 gauge IV with 1,000 milliliters of normal saline in my right AC, and started a second IV in my right hand. Withheld pain meds due to low blood pressure, and I believe I got high flow oxygen via non-rebreather, but I'm not certain. So this next photo, I believe, is me in the ICU. They did take C-spine precautions, makes sense due to the mechanism of injury of a crash at about 50 miles an hour. Also, it looks like I hit my head on something. Next photo, so when I came to, it was a few days later. My whole family was in the room. They'd driven up from Portland, and the pole was in my room. So they let me keep that little souvenir. I've got it on the shelf at home. This next photo, so that's showing where the impaling happened. Even from a skeletal standpoint, very fortunate place for that to happen. This next photo showing some of the vasculature, showing the kidneys, how close we were to those. Yeah, there's not a lot of places where a full-on pole can fit through a person, and I'm not that big of a person, so this, I think, really shows how lucky I was. So this next one is showing some of the vasculature. So one of the things that I learned from the surgeon is, so he said, because the pole cap was there and skin so stretchy, it pushed my organs out of the way, but there were mesenteric arteries that bifurcated, were on either side of the pole. So they were up directly against it, must have just barely pushed them out of the way. And if you look at in the patient's lower left, the bottom right of the screen, you can see how there's room for a pole to go through there, but not a whole lot. Same thing in the next photo. When you look at some of the vasculature of the abdomen, it is very, very fortunate that I didn't have any arteries rupture there. So next we have some photos of what it looked like when I woke up. So I've got this zipper going all along my stomach. That's because they had to find out the damage in there. So they performed an X-lap, which is an exploratory laparotomy. So they pull everything out, all the intestines, everything, and check the damage, make sure that nothing's ruptured or anything like that. And I'm very fortunate that nothing was. There's some weird wound packing tubes in there, and then I had a drain tube on the front and back of my stomach. So this next one, up close, really gross one of the entrance wound, and fair bit of swelling in my lower abdomen that lasted for about a week. It's another gross one at the front, and then in the back. So this is probably 4 days after the accident. You can still see quite a bit of bruising and starting to yellow around the periphery of that. And then this gross drain here. So I had to do physical therapy. I was at the hospital for a week. This gentleman here has helped me walk around the hospital. Very painful. This next photo is me getting pudding, and that's the first food I've had in, I believe, 6 days. Yeah, I had the accident on the 19th. It sure sucked not being able to eat, come Thanksgiving. So when I finally did get to eat food, I was very psyched. You can see me pretty psyched in this next photo. And then getting some of those drain tubes out. This next photo is showing some of the bruising on the posterior aspect. This would be 3 days after, and then a week after, you'll see in this next photo, a lot of that bruising has gone away. That's right before I'm DC'd from the hospital. All right, now this next one's fun. So, you know how I had some pizza, reclined, went to bed? So I still had the pizza box on my lap when the accident happened. And the pole went right through. So I had some pizza inside of me and some cardboard lodged in my back, and yeah, we finally figured that out, kind of discussing everything with the surgeon on the last day. When we told him about the hole in the pizza box, he's like, oh, that's what that stuff was in your back. I saw this weird brown stuff. I was super curious. Yeah. So, and then we'll make it a happy ending. So, a year later, I went back with Ashley to climb Dragon Tail Peak again. I went on the same day, November 19th. But this time, made it a 2-day. So instead of trying to do everything one day, we actually stayed the night and did it, climbed the mountain the next day. So here's climbing up there. And we have super psyched at the top with a goofy mustache. Really windy. So you'll see that in the next photo here.
Okay.
And that is it. That's the whole scenario. So I want to thank you guys for bearing with me. Originally, I intended to just stand in front of the class and kind of present what happened, and I'm so glad I didn't, because I don't think I could have done it. I thought I was over the PTSD from this deal, and I could talk about it, comfortably, but when it came down to all the little details and reliving it, it was very difficult. And I guess that's just something to keep in mind as a patient, as a first responder. This stuff really can and does affect you. So I guess just have some good strategies for it. I want to thank the first responders who saved me. You guys are my inspiration to do this. And I think my story, it shows the kind of impact that we can make as a paramedic in someone's life. You can show up when they're on the brink of death, and with the right interventions, you can actually save someone's life. That's what happened to me, and I'm hoping that I can pay that forward someday. I think everyone in this classroom wants to save some lives, and this is a good story of when that happened. So thank you guys for your time, and I'll see you in class.